Hey guys, I'm John Malecki and welcome back to part 2 of my reclaimed wood buffet. In this part I'm going to be building all the doors and drawers, the drawer fronts, and assembling the rest of the carcass. So here I'm starting to mill all the lumber for the door fronts, and I'm going to be using same reclaimed wood. What I'm doing is rough cutting everything down to a 3-inch width, and then I'm going to use tongue and groove joinery to put the doors together with a floating panel, a reverse raised panel actually, in the center. This is just a bad angle that I thought looked way cooler in person, so sorry about that. So here you can see I'm resawing down the pieces, and you can see a little bit better of an angle on how I go about that. But once I have them down to 3 inches, it's pretty quick work. I actually resaw them down to a little heavy, over 3/4 of an inch, and that way I can sand them down to their final dimension. Once I'm down to rough width and thickness, it's over to the miter saw to cut everything down to length. After I got everything cut down to size, I'm going to go ahead and cut all of the slots for the tenons and the center panel in every piece that is going to be in the door joinery. And then after this, I will go back and cut all of the tenons that will join the tops and the bottoms of all the rails and stiles together. So for this part, I'm going to be using the table saw and the miter gauge to cut my tenons, and you can see here I just set the fence to the depth of the tenon I want, and then I just slowly pull the piece back and run it over the saw blade to cut the tenon the size that I want. Before I did this, I took a test piece and made sure that it fit in all the slots. So I had the saw blade rose to the height that I needed it to be. So moving on to gluing up the panels, I have everything rough cut, and what I'm going to do here is use a tape joint with some DAP Rapid Fuse. This stuff dries in 30 minutes and makes it so I can continue to work on the project and not have to glue these panels up overnight. So you can check out that here. It's pretty simple, and I apologize for the camera. Was still learning how to use this bad boy when I shot this. Once the door panels are dry, I'm over there with the Rotex and I'm just sanding them down the flat. The Rotex is a great tool for reclaimed wood, or any wood I would suggest. Hogs out the material pretty quickly and has some pretty awesome dust collection, as you can see there. I get them down to as flat as I can, and then I'm going to head over to the table saw to cut the angled edges that'll make it fit inside the door panel. So here I have the blade angled away from the fence, and I'm just taking away parts of the panels slowly in order to get that 1/4 inch groove that's inside all the rails and stiles. And I'll raise the blade gradually after I run each piece through, and that way I don't have any, it makes it less dangerous and I don't have any ridiculous tear out or any issues with that. Make sure you use a feather board if you do this like this too. And once they're all cut, it's back over to the Rotex to clean them up a bit before they go into pre-finish. You can see the angle I ended up cutting and raising the blade. Didn't get the footage there, I guess the camera died, but I ended up cutting probably a 2.5 inch high cut on the angle. I pre-finish everything because these doors will move inside of the rails and stiles, so pre-finishing them, you don't reveal an unfinished line in the door as the movement occurs over time. Here I'm just putting the doors together. I had them pre-laid out and mocked up in case I had to do any trim work on the tenons, and then I just go ahead and assemble them. I use a lot of glue, and here I'm using a clamp to make sure that they stay square on the bottom. Slide in your panel and then slide in the top stile. I believe that's a stile. Sorry if my terminology's off, but I slide it in, and then what I do is I flip the door over and I pin it from the back with a 5/8 inch 23 gauge pin nail. And what that does is just sets the tenon inside of the mortise or inside of its slot, and it helps it to stay there as it dries so I don't have to keep them in clamps. After that, I flatten them with a Rotex. You can also use a belt sander here, or excuse me, a drum sander, and that's a nice quick tool and a good use and application for it there. Super disappointed I lost the footage, but what I ended up doing was building my drawers out of reclaimed wood and using finger joints. It's a pretty standard procedure, and there's a lot of tutorials out there to learn how to do it. So I would suggest Googling one of those if you want to learn how to do a finger joint. And I'm sorry that I lost that footage there. But here you can see a tighter angle on the joint itself. The Rotex brings that down pretty quickly, and then my drawers are ready to roll. Back over to the carcass just for a quick sanding, and then we're going to be assembling the trim work and fastening that to the carcass. Once I have the carcass sanded down, I'm taking my trim boards, and these are 3/4 of an inch thick by 4 1/4 inches tall. And what I'm doing is running them over the shaper with a coving bit. And the coving bit will put a nice little rounded bead on the top, and then I'll cut them down to the 4 inches that I want for the height. I used some pretty banged up pieces here with some cool knots and stuff in them, and then I went overhead and mitered one side. After the one side's mitered, I assembled the trim work on the base of the cabinet, and that's pretty self-explanatory. On to finishing all the doors and the drawer fronts, I'm just using a Minwax stain. I don't use a stain sealer or a pre-stain when I'm doing reclaimed wood because I do like to see the variations in how the wood takes the stain. Once I have the doors and drawers on the rack, I'm back over to staining the rest of the carcass. You can see all the trim work assembled here, and I did do a coving molding on the top rail, which I made out of 1 inch by 1 inch square piece of stock, doing the same process, cutting it wide and then trimming it down on the table saw, on the shaper, excuse me. Here I'm making sure I get stain into all the cracks and crevices. Pretty self-explanatory. I'm almost positive most of the people watching these videos have stained something before, but this is my process. I'm using a foam brush, and I'm just making sure it's in every crevice I can get it into. Here I'm applying General Finishes Endurovar. I'm loving this finish, and if you guys are interested in what I use for reclaimed wood, I'll tag my last video, which are my tips and tricks on how I finish reclaimed wood. But here you can see it sprays nice and evenly and gives a beautiful build, and I really like that part of it. To attach the doors, I like to use my Craig system, and this system's pretty good. It's pretty DIY, and it makes it really easy and mobile. Here I'm just using their hardware fastening jig. I line it up at the 3 inch mark, and then I have it depth stop set. I drill it down, comes out nicely, and then I do the same thing on all 4 of the doors. Using their new clamping system makes it go pretty quickly too, and I'm just working on top of the carcass here because we had stuff all over the shop this day. Once all of the holes are drilled, I attach the door hinges, and then I'll go ahead and attach those to the carcass. Here I'm using Blum soft close door hinges. It's because I had them on hand left over from another build. In the interior rail, you're going to want to use a frameless hinge, and on the exterior rail, you're going to want to use a 3/4 inch framed hinge. They're 2 different fasteners, but they all go into the door the same way. They just attach to the carcass differently. And like I said, here I am mounting one of the doors on the outside, and these use a 3/4 inch interior mounted Blum hinge, and it just mounts a little bit differently. So I messed around with it to get it into place, and then I had to shim it out a bit here is what you're seeing. I'll go ahead and screw that into the side panels on the door carcass, and we're ready to install the drawers. After I attach all the slides and rails, I just go ahead and mock up the drawer front itself. I apply some double-sided tape to the back of the drawer front, and I squeeze it into place. I didn't have a consistent gap around on this one, so what I ended up doing was using a hand plane to get it into place, and then making sure the gap was even. I screwed it in and then came back and touched it up with stain and finish after the fact. Now, I don't recommend doing things this way, hence why it's not on camera, but sometimes you just gotta improvise because you messed up in your measurements before you fabricated the piece. I'm using a 1-inch screw with a button head to attach drawer fronts, and they should stay on there forever. So you'll see I'm just messing around attaching the drawers the rest of the way in and messing with a little bit of adjustment there. And that's about it. The client has the top on site as well as the hardware on site, so I can't install that in this video, but I want to thank you guys for tuning in and checking this one out. It was a fun build, and I'm glad I could do something from the complete beginning without using a single piece of plywood, and show you guys how to build a cabinet with some awesome reclaimed timber. If you want to see a full write-up, you can head over to my website, johnmalecki.com, where I'll have links in the description for, as well as more links to the tools and the tips I have in this video for you guys to go ahead and build your own. Until next time, guys, keep building, and thanks for watching.